Two police officers stopped a black man on a quiet street, accusing him of a crime he didn't commit. What they didn't know was that he was the state's chief prosecutor, ready to uncover their lies and the deep corruption in the system. What happened next stunned everyone. But first, let's go back to the beginning. David Miller, a tall, middle-aged black man in a sharp navy blue suit, walked through the peaceful suburban streets of Woodrest. It was late, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the empty road. David was on his way home after a long day working on a big case. The briefcase in his hand felt heavier than usual, but his mind was full of tomorrow's courtroom strategy. As he turned a corner, flashing red and blue lights suddenly lit up the street. David stopped and instinctively raised his hands slightly, showing he meant no harm. The police car rolled up next to him, and two officers stepped out. "Evening," said Officer Barnes, a short, stocky man in his 40s with a sarcastic smirk. "What are you doing out here this late?" "Just walking home," David replied calmly, keeping his tone even. "Is there a problem?" Barnes exchanged a glance with his younger partner, Officer Grant, who looked unsure. "Got a call about a break-in," Barnes said, folding his arms. "You match the description." David raised an eyebrow. "A break-in? I just came from my office downtown. I'm a lawyer." Barnes gave a dry laugh. "A lawyer, huh? What's in the briefcase? Stolen stuff?" Grant looked uncomfortable but didn't speak. "It's full of legal documents," David said. "You can check if you want." Without asking, Barnes grabbed the briefcase and started going through the neatly stacked papers, ignoring David's objections. "Huh," he said mockingly. "Someone's trying really hard to look innocent." "This is harassment," David said firmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." "We'll be the judge of that," Barnes snapped. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "On what grounds?" David asked, his patience wearing thin. "You have no proof." Barnes roughly cuffed him before he could finish. "Resisting an officer, for starters," he said harshly. "Let's see what else we can pin on you." Grant hesitated, then quietly spoke into his radio. "We're bringing in a suspect," he said, avoiding David's eyes. David was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser, his heart racing, not with fear, but with fury. He stayed silent, silently vowing this injustice wouldn't go unanswered. At the station, David was taken to a cold, brightly lit booking area. The air smelled like bleach and old coffee. Phones rang in the background, voices echoing through the halls. Officer Barnes, still wearing his smug grin, started processing David, while Grant stood awkwardly by the door. David's belongings were taken one by one. His wallet, phone, and briefcase, carelessly handled like he was already guilty. He was led to a small, chilly jail cell with rusty bars and cracked paint. Barnes sat in the next room, typing up a report that painted David as a dangerous criminal. Charges included burglary, resisting arrest, and possession of stolen property. The truth didn't matter. Barnes twisted the facts to fit his story. Grant stood nearby, arms crossed, his jaw tight. He looked like he was fighting with himself, but said nothing. Staying silent, even when it meant letting injustice win, was the easier choice. Inside the cell, David sat on a hard bench bolted to the wall, staring at the floor. His mind was spinning with disbelief and anger. Through the bars, he could hear Barnes bragging to another officer. "Another one off the streets," Barnes laughed. "Can't wait to see his face when the court throws the book at him." David's fists clenched. The man who had spent his life fighting racism was now trapped by it. His heart pounded with a mix of rage and determination. David wasn't going to let this go. He was ready to fight. The next morning, he used his one phone call to reach out to his legal team. By noon, his assistant Rachel marched into the police station carrying a thick stack of evidence. Not only did it prove the charges were false, but it also hinted at serious misconduct by Officer Barnes. Within hours, David was released. He had won his freedom, but that wasn't enough. As he stepped out of the station, his mind was already focused on one goal: exposing the corruption that nearly ruined him. A week later, the courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with reporters, lawyers, and people eager to see the trial unfold. At the prosecution table, Officer Barnes sat back confidently, wearing a smug grin. Next to him, Officer Grant looked tense, his eyes fixed anywhere but on David. Between them sat Patricia Reynolds, the district's top prosecutor, known for her tough stance on crime. She calmly flipped through her notes, glancing only briefly at David as he walked in. David entered with quiet confidence. Dressed in a sharp suit and moving with purpose, he drew everyone's attention as he made his way to the defense table. He placed his briefcase down carefully. The room fell silent as the judge entered and called the court to order. When the hearing began, David stood. His voice was calm and clear. "Your Honor, I'll be representing myself." A wave of surprise swept through the courtroom. Barnes's smirk faded. Reynolds narrowed her eyes. This move wasn't part of their plan. Over the next hour, David calmly and skillfully took apart the prosecution's case. He began by showing video footage from a nearby ATM that clearly showed he was far from the crime scene at the time of the burglary. The timestamp and clear video left no doubt. Then came the turning point: an audio recording from the police car. The courtroom went quiet as Barnes's voice played through the speakers, mocking David and admitting no real suspect had matched the reported crime. Reynolds jumped in with loud objections, but the judge overruled her every time. The evidence was solid. Finally, David called Officer Grant to the stand. The young officer looked nervous, his hands shaking as he took the oath. Under David's calm but sharp questioning, Grant broke. "It wasn't right," he said quietly. "There was no evidence. Barnes told me to make it look real." Gasps and whispers filled the courtroom. Barnes leapt to his feet, shouting, "He's lying!" But it was too late. The truth was out, and their false story had fallen apart. Reynolds quickly asked for a recess, but David wasn't finished. He stood once more. "Your Honor, I have one more piece of evidence to submit." He handed the judge a folder, then turned to the courtroom. "This," David said, "is my resume. Before I was falsely arrested, before false charges were filed against me, I was preparing for this very trial. I'm not just any lawyer. I'm the chief prosecutor of this state." The room went silent. Then David continued, his voice louder now. "And I will not allow corruption to go unchecked. Not in my office, not in my state, and definitely not by those sworn to serve and protect." Barnes looked pale. Reynolds lowered her eyes. The judge restored order and dropped all charges against David within minutes. But things didn't end there. David filed a formal complaint against Barnes, which led to an internal investigation. It revealed years of misconduct. Barnes lost his badge. Grant, though involved, cooperated fully and was given another chance under strict probation. Weeks later, David stood at a podium outside the courthouse, speaking to a crowd of reporters. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about a system that lets injustice grow, but we can fix it, together." The crowd broke into loud applause as David stepped back. He had cleared his name, but his fight for justice was just beginning.